join us. As you know, this is a very important topic that we're addressing tonight, looking at housing in New South Wales, because even earlier today I took a call from a friend of mine over in Port Macquarie, and they're going through similar struggles, if not slightly harder for them to find trades. Is a bit difficult at the moment, and prices are skyrocketing. And I guess as Arabs, we're all experts in this field. So tonight I decided to choose the most foremost Arab in this topic to give the presentation, so that way we can listen to his not only opinions but also experiences, and also be able to give us an unfiltered direction and truth as to where we should be focusing and going as well. So please do hope you enjoy the evening. If you have any questions or like to know more about the Australian Arab Business Council, please reach out to me, and of course to our board members, who will get them to stand later in the evening as well. And if there's any topics that you'd like to see be addressed through the Arab Business Council, or any initiatives that you'd like us to take on as well, please do not hesitate to let us know. The network is only as strong as its members, and so our strength comes from your strength, and we want to make sure that you're firing on all cylinders so we can do so as well. So enjoy the evening, and we'll chat to you soon anyway. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to introduce our wonderful keynote speaker for the night. So Australia's housing crisis is deepening, with skyrocketing prices, limited supply and growing affordability challenges pushing both policymakers and the property sector to search for answers. Dr. Shane Geha is the Managing Director and co-founder of EG Advisory, a premier rezoning company with expertise in land transformation operating across Australia. Dr. Geha brings a rare combination of deep academic insight and frontline experience, having led over 200 rezonings and 1,000 development approvals across New South Wales. His work has unlocked some of the state's most significant urban transformations, from Little Bay to Riverstone. Without further ado, please, Dr. Shane Geha.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it was Sir Edward Coke in 1628 that first popularised the phrase in his famous treatise, The Institutions of the Laws of England. The phrase was, "Every man's house is his castle." Could I tell you that that house today is undergoing a great metamorphosis? It is getting smaller, and it's getting more distant from the city. And as Napoleon once said, aspiration runs the world. And one of the great aspirations of all of us, I think, that live in this great country and many others, is perhaps the dream of owning our own home. And that dream in the 1960s was a quarter-acre block. Are you dreaming this with me? A quarter-acre block, a detached house, somewhere in suburbia, about 12 k's out from the city, say somewhere around Ashfield. And that would have cost you 3 times the annual average income. Today, that same dream is a much smaller block, 20 k's from the city, and it costs you 14 times the average annual income. So you can see that the dream is getting a little harder to imagine for a lot of us. I mean, for a lot of people today, particularly young people, to own their own place probably means they've got to get the lotto numbers right on Monday, or they've got to have a great uncle or aunt benefactor that can give them a whole heap of money, at least for a deposit. And you might say, well, that's pretty good, because 70% of us own our own homes and only 30% 70% of us are investors. So by 70%, I mean either own or I'm in the process of owning our own home. But see, the problem with that is that you have just started creating a city of great inequality. And the problem with cities of great inequality is that you end up at an extreme case with cities like Johannesburg, where you've got something called the gilded city effect. So the top 40 suburbs that are inside the golden cage, they're all doing very well. And then you've got mass squalor just outside. Now, what's the problem with that is that as soon as you drive your car outside of the gilded cage area, you probably get mud, or you can't feel safe to walk home. That is not the city model that I think any of us aspire to. Also, I feel that since we all aspire to have children who have homes near where we live, we probably can't imagine yet at the moment, given that each of you would, given 70% of you, would either own or be owning your own home right now, given the statistic. Perhaps in this room it's a slightly higher number. But your children who are now perhaps 20 or about to graduate from university with a great degree in law or engineering cannot actually find a place remotely close in price to where you are. Is that a good thing? No, because it's also a problem for families to have their loved ones near them. And of course, if we have young ones and they're entering the market, and they might be your young ones or my young ones or someone else's, they can't actually crack the market. So think that the average house, where EG is building a small subdivision in Leppington at the moment, and would you believe that a small subdivision of land of 300 square metres with house in Leppington, by the way, I didn't say Kensington, I said Leppington, is now $1.4 million. So, first question, where do the poor people live? Secondly, remember that we were all poor once. We might be wealthy now. See, this is an Armani, a Versace tie. It's expensive. But I didn't always wear one of these, right? So the reality is that poor is where we all started. Poor is where our parents started. Poor is where our grandparents started. And poverty is perhaps the starting point of aspiration. We all aspired, as Napoleon said, to change the world. And yet today, that change is in a crisis mode in terms of housing in Sydney. So why are we in a crisis? What do you think? Does anyone have a view? Yeah?
Lack of supply.
Lack of supply. What else? Inflation. Land release. So that's a supply issue. Poor planning. Yes. Bad rules. Tight lending rules. Income is not keeping up with price inflation of housing. No vision. It's all of those things, of course. But let me say to you this. There are probably 4 aspects to the crisis. And by the way, so Winston Churchill, who inspired me throughout my younger years, used to always say, never waste a good crisis. Right? And I'll tell you why. I've come to realise, having lived in a great democracy like this for the best part of my 50 years on Earth, that it actually takes a crisis for our governments to do something brave. Generally, in these really nice, well-developed first world countries, everything moves slowly and gradually, and it moves at snail's pace, right? I wrote an article recently, if some of you would like to read it, on LinkedIn, quipping about snail's pace. I was marvelling at how slow the approvals are for houses and buildings and projects in Sydney. Now, I've worked in this space for 26 years, just in the approval space. So I've rezoned more land in Sydney than just about anyone else. That's about $34 billion by last count. So imagine I know this process a little bit. Imagine. And let me say this to you. There are apparently 180 varieties of snail in the world. 180 varieties. The average snail is apparently called the average garden snail. That's its name. Okay? Now, the average garden snail travels at 0.05 kilometers an hour. And he sleeps for 8 hours a day. Or she sleeps for 8 hours a day. So think of this. If you sleep as a snail for 8 hours a day and travel at 0.05 kilometers an hour, you have enough time to go from Sydney to Canberra and back, before I get a $50 million DA approved in New South Wales. Now that is snail space, isn't it? And you know what? It's all riddled with red tape. Some of you talked about the red tape. Red tape, there's red tape everywhere. And it's true. By the way, you'd be interested to know the origins of red tape. Red tape was actually invented by Holy Emperor Charles V and King of Spain in the 1500s, in the 16th century. And think of it this way, red is the colour of the emperor. So when dossiers that were leather, filled with paper, were bound with string, they were unimportant. But if they're bound with red tape, now they had to be sped up because they're for the emperor. Now what I'd like to know, I'm sure you would, is at which point did red tape go from speeding up a file to slowing it down? But that's what we have today. And all of the numbers they publish for why we can't get stuff out are actually incorrect. They're incredibly skewed towards the lower end because they include DAs for signage and driveways and simple extensions. If you actually included just the bigger stuff or the housing on its own, it would be more than 2 years on average to get an approval. By the way, this is not building it. This is just getting the approval to build it. And so what do we do in a crisis? I remember having a conversation with, there's only a few hundred of us, you're not going to tell anyone. I was having a conversation with the Premier about a year ago. And he said to me, tell me what I'm going to do to put more housing. How am I going to fix it? And he said, I promised housing. I promised. This was an election promise. I said, Premier, it's very admirable. It is a great thing that you've promised houses. It's a basic necessity. And it is something we should all aspire to do better and faster. But remember, I've been 26 years running EG, 26 years. Thousands of DAs, generally the most complex in the state. And after 26 years, would you believe we are going slower and worse than better and faster? Imagine if you did the same thing for 26 years. Imagine if you cooked mjadra for 26 years. Do you think after 26 years you would go faster and better or slower and worse? Can someone tell me how this works out? And you know what? We don't live in a terrible place. We really live in a great country. We live in a great city. We are in the world's most livable city, in my view. I've visited 350 cities in the world. And if you take all the parameters, the clean air, the good living, the reality checks, the opportunities for employment, the equality, the human rights, the clean air, and that amazing harbour, that's got to be the nicest harbour in the world, honestly. I've seen San Francisco, I've seen Barcelona, there's no harbour like that. So in every survey, Sydney would rank number 1 in the world, except in some surveys it ranks 3 or 4. And the main reason is affordability. And we are in an affordability crisis. So what is it that makes up the price of a house that we can fix? Let's have a think about it for a moment. So the price of a house is made up of 100 things, but if I can simplify it, the price of a house is made up of 3 things only. It's made up of land, construction, and fees and charges. And then we just add the profit on top. That's it. That's the price. So construction cost is probably the least movable out of the 3 items. So can we do it cheaper? Well, construction cost is essentially made up of materials, and labour. Now, if the price of labour keeps going up, particularly for the minimum wage, and that's fair, then really the labour costs can't come down. And of course, we have less tradesmen today per capita than we did 20 years ago. So you can't charge less. Okay, materials now have to be brought from further out and dumped further out. The cost of tipping is more expensive. So essentially the costs altogether, probably in construction, are almost immovable. If not immovable, then they will go up. That's probably where they'll go. So assume that category can't fix the housing price. Fees and charges. Now, would you believe that the Sydney Water fees have just doubled in the last 2 years? Would you believe? Let me give you a really interesting example. I did my first development in New South Wales in Drummoyne in 1998. And that development had a council charge, what they call the Section 711 now, but it used to be called the Section 94, of $500 an apartment. Just to give you a comparison, this is still in my lifetime, remember, it's now $34,000 an apartment. Now, remember that this is all justified on the grounds that it's a public benefit, and no doubt it is. No doubt, no doubt. The problem is it just goes on the cost base, right? So Sydney Water doubles its charges. The cost, and by the way, DA conditions used to be 2 pages. Now there's something like 16 pages for a decent-sized project. Now you underground the cables for the whole street for $500,000 as a DA condition. Guess where that cost goes? Right on top. So assume fees and charges, and by the way, from what I can see, the fees and charges are almost like heroin. They're addicted to them. And I can't see anybody reducing them going forward. So assume the fees and charges. By the way, the GST will not be removed on houses. So if you're buying a new house, there's GST. You've also got GST on old houses without you knowing, because what happens is when the 10% price differential between an existing house and a new house is there, you generally get a little bit of price inflation, usually about 5 or 6% on the old house, because it's still cheaper than buying new, right? So the GST is not going anywhere. Stamp duty is still at 5.5% of land. We still pay 1.6% land tax per year, every year on the land. It's usually about 7 years from the time we buy a nice big block of land to the time we can give you a house you can sleep in, 6 or 7 years. So add 1.6% a year. And then, of course, you've got the council contributions at, they're about 68,000 a house, and they're about 30-odd thousand an apartment. That's just, by the way, the benefit you get. When you pay the rate, someone comes and collects the garbage. When you pay the Section 711, nothing happens. My daughter was asking the other day, naively, she's not in the property business, and I said, that's the privilege of doing business in New South Wales, sweetheart. That's the privilege of doing business. We're still happy to do business. We like it. So that leaves us with one category, the land. Now, the land ought to be very elastic, because what's land worth? What someone will pay, right? Essentially, it's more than that. If you read my PhD from 20 years ago, you will probably note that land essentially is dictated in value terms by its productive capacity to produce income or capital or both. So if the land can produce more houses, it's worth more. If it can produce taller buildings with more apartments and they can be costed at a higher price compared to their sell price to their delivery price, then the land immediately is invested with more value. And that, I think, is where the cheaper price should come. The problem is, if you've got red tape over everything, if you've got, I would say there would be 14 times more rules 26 years after I started EG than now. 16 times, 1,600%. The volumes of stuff you have to read. By the way, I wrote lots of those rules, but my hope was that we'd simplify things and we'd get rid of a lot of the old stuff. Of course, everyone's too scared to get rid of stuff, so what we do, we just keep piling it on. And now you need an expert like me to just take you through a house extension. And by the way, I think it's criminal. I mean, if you've got land zoned for a house, and the objectives are to build a house, and we've created it for a house, and you're an honourable citizen that wants to build a house, I don't understand why it should take you a year and a half to get it approved. You should just be able to build the house. But no, the unregulated city horrifies us. At any rate, I think the crisis is good in only one way, and that is it will force the government to do something. Because remember, the reason why we're 100,000 houses short just now, that's why we will never meet the quota, is because we've been deficient for the last 14 years. It's not just this year or last year or the year before. You see, it's a little bit like turning up the night before the HSC and saying, how am I going to pass the 4-unit maths exam? The truth is, you're going to flunk it very badly because you needed to have been studying on the first week of year 11, right? It doesn't happen like that. And so, at the end, we still have the greatest country in the world. We are the lucky country. We really are the lucky country. And let me tell you why we are the lucky country. Because we have 550 years worth of minerals that we can still sell. 550, right? We have agricultural products that not even are at capacity that would feed all of Asia if only we just doubled production, which is very easy to do one day. We have pretty much all of the world's high-grade iron ore. We own most of the world's fissionable uranium. We own nearly all of the world's aluminium, half of the world's copper, a quarter of the world's tin, a third of the world's zinc. We're only one of 4 countries that owns the must I continue? We have 100 million cows. We have 100 million sheep. We have every variety of wheat in the world. We have 8 climates. We can give you mangoes and strawberries at the same time of the year, right? We are truly a lucky country. And you know what? If a lucky country doesn't know how to take opportunity of its luck, there will come a day when you're not that lucky. And I don't know if any of you have read La Fontaine, and La Fontaine has this great fable written in the 1400s. And La Fontaine has a famous story called La cigale et le fourmi, the cicada and the ant. And the cicada singing in the summer, all summer long, carelessly, cheerfully. And the ant is working hard, picking up the grains and taking them to its burrow. And eventually when the winter comes and the weather is freezing, and the cicada has stopped singing because he's freezing, but he doesn't have any food, the ant said, well, you should have thought about this when I was working hard in the summer. You know what? We need to remember to work hard in the summer, because it will not be summer forever. And all I will say is, we have an amazing country. We have an amazing city, the world's #1. We have a housing crisis that we can now use new rules to address, so we can have a lot more housing a lot more quickly. We should forget about some of the rules. Remember what Justice Sutherland once said when they told him, the rules, we're contradicting the rules. Justice Sutherland was the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court that gave birth to zoning in the Western Hemisphere. He said, whenever I'm confused about the rules, I only just remember one rule. Salus populi suprema lex est. The welfare of the people is the supreme law. And ladies and gentlemen, it should be the welfare of the people that rules this city. Madam MC.
Now, Dr. Shane's going to hang around for some questions. I'm not sure that we have a second mic. We don't. So if anyone has any questions, okay. Question? Nice, big, loud voice for us, Hayden.
My voice is
Nice and loud.
strong. To solve the housing crisis, the best thing is to change the zoning in the areas. because according to the newspaper, they have a statistic investigation. They find Lakemba, Bankstown, Belmore, very intense area, and there's not many houses. There's 2-3 families living there. Most of it from Asia, like India, Bangladesh, all that. Some of them go to the ship, someone else takes his bed. They rotate on the bed to replace someone because they couldn't afford one person to pay.
Right.
That's the only thing I'll
Okay,
add.
so statement. Thank you, Henry. Thank you very much. So, Shane, did you want to respond or you'll agree?
I think it's well said.
Hasan.
Well, relative to other major cities, Sydney is really very lowly populated, very low population. Yet we still have problems in Sydney, in terms of youth and so forth. The problem is really changing habits. We all wake up at the same time, we all sleep at the same time, we will go to work at the same time, come back from work at the same time. So this problem is, and you go and drive in the morning, you find every single car has got one person in it. If we don't change habits, have like better public transport, have more people using the same cars and work from home and work different hours of the day, I think the problem will continue. Because we built up high residential apartments, but the roads are still the same. So I'd like your opinion.
Well, height is the friend of the city, and density is the friend of the city. Let me give you some stats. So Sydney is 417 people per square kilometre. That's using something called the Metropolitan Statistical Area. That's the expanse of the city and its greater outer suburbs. So by world standards, it's a very low density city. So by world standards. So most of the American cities are less dense, but if you compare it to London, it's a fifth of the density of London. It's a quarter of the density of Paris. It's a quarter of the density of Rome, a quarter of the density of Rome. It's about 11th the density of Tokyo, and it's about 1/33 the density of Manhattan. By the way, I've just named some of the beautiful cities you all love to go to in the holidays, right? And so you look at some of the least dense cities in the world, like LA, and they have a much worse congestion problem than us. And that's mainly a fault of the planning of the city. So if you don't know how to put the density next to public transport, then you will not get people to leave the motor car, because everything needs a car journey then. And people are scared of density, but actually density is the only way you can make public transport viable. And if you want the public transport to work and be paid for by the public, then you need to put tall buildings and lots of density and multiplicity of uses right next to it. So you don't have to travel to get the milk. You don't have to travel to drop off your shopping, to your laundry, to wash the dog, to play. The more you can put closer together with heterogeneous land uses, the better the city will work. And you will reduce congestion even with more population. But if we were 10 million people, we'd be a better city. I promise you.
Sorry. Sorry. Adnan.
Thank you, Shane, for this presentation. Please think how we can make the snake running fast, how we can cook الجدر fast, and how we can let the government not degrade to tax and.
Okay, I've worked in the system a long time. I've come to realise that democracy is a bit like syrup. You pour it, it's like atar. You pour it at the top of George Street, it sticks on everything eventually, but God help you waiting for it to circulate, right? It's just a slow-moving process. We ask everybody all the time millions of questions, people who know, people who don't know. We write it down, we put it into a book, we make a new book, we write about it again, we put it on the website. All of that to make a decision that ought to be more obvious, that can be done quicker. I think the consultation process needs to be far more abbreviated. That's not to say you don't consult, but it's to say you should do it far more quickly in order to deliver things in real time. I'll give you an example. If I was to agree with you today that we needed a hotel in the middle of Bankstown, just today, and we had the money to build it, from the time we agree to the time we can actually put people on those beds is 6 years. That's a very inelastic supply-demand equation. You know, if Tim Tams, if Arnott's worked out, that's a great biscuit. If Tim Tam was more popular, they can press a button at the factory and they can make 10 times more Tim Tams in 2 days, right? And they will sell them. But we can't do that because we have this highly regulated system, which we've come to believe is a protection against bad development or whatever the nonsense is. It's complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. It's death by 1,000 rules. Now, the problem is, if you want, let me give you a slightly more hilarious example. You look very beautifully dressed today. You wore your suit, your pink tie, your nice shoes. You combed your beard. If I gave you 100 rules more on how to get ready, you can only comb your beard with your left hand. You can only put your shoes on with your right hand. You can only put your tie on in a Windsor knot that's tied twice. You can only wear a blue suit. You can only wear your watch on your left hand. You can only... If I gave you 100 more rules, which is what we have, you cannot be here at 7 o'clock. You will be here at 8:30, in which case you would have missed this talk.
I think we've got a bit more time. Adnan, and then we have Hassan. We've got 2 more before you.
It's a small scope in a much bigger picture. And the idea that when you do something on its own without vision, you get lost. And I'm surprised that Tony says, look, I just want to build affordability homes or X, but not looking at the bigger picture that can actually deliver in that a little bit later down the line in a much easier way.
Yeah.
So, and I guess within that, fighting issues like immigration coming in, population numbers, etc. Surely there is a vision that sort of takes us 5 and 10 and 15 years down the track. Is there such a thing?
No, there is no vision, neither at the federal government nor at the state. Trust me, I know them very well. 14 prime ministers have been to my office. I've met all of them. I've spent time with them. They're beautiful people. They're intelligent. They're well-meaning. They're honourable. Trust me, they're excellent people. But no, the vision is, in 3 years' time, how do I win the election? By the way, in 2.5 years' time, you've got to start mobilising.
Can I give you a vision?
I'll give you my vision. I'll tell you my vision.
Tell them somewhere there is a vision.
I'll tell you my vision. My vision, firstly, is that this country didn't benefit from immigration. It was built on it. That's my vision. And by the way, if you're not sure why the GDP numbers look so weak, it's because we've had poor immigration for the last 3 years. That's one big reason. Just don't think of people as a drain. Think of people as a resource. Think of the chef who's cooked for us a meal we've never had. Think of the builder who's teaching us new stuff. Think of the workers that are working in our restaurants. And remember this, there's no combination of less GDP hours worked that produces more GDP. There's no combination. So if you study less for your maths exam, there's really very little chance you'll do better. You have to study more. You might say, I'm smart, whatever. You should be smart and study more. That's what I say. Let me tell you this. The problem is that immigration policy is set by the feds and housing policy is set by the states. And there is no real ability for the feds to create genuine housing policy at the state level. So here's the big disconnect now. We've got the feds saying GDP numbers are really low, growth is low, we should increase migration. And we've got the states. This state's better than most at the moment, by the way, and I congratulate some of the people in it, but we're still not that good. I mean, you know, we're in the C class. We're not in the B or the A. We should be in the A class. And the problem with that is that if you want to add rules and regulations, and adding the building commissioner to the rules and the regulations has been singularly unhelpful. I mean, I don't know what it's done to fix the bottom 20%. That would have been fixed anyway. But the 60% sitting on top of that is now costing us 30% more for no added value to quality whatsoever. Trust me, no added value to quality. And it costs us 30% more in time. So whatever we could build before, we now take 30% longer to build the same stuff. Not good. Not good when you have a housing crisis. right? And you know what? We've introduced these SEP rules. By the way, I advise the Premier that these are good things, right? So let me espouse their benefits. So essentially a SEP will overrule, a state environmental planning policy will overrule all local rules. So this new low and medium density SEP will work, and the new 30% with the affordable housing. But remember, affordable housing in a city like Sydney is a bit of a fallacy. This is what I was saying to the Premier. If you have 100 units and you want to make 10 of them completely affordable, guess what happens to the other 90 units? They become less affordable. So let's listen to this logic. Make 90% of the units less affordable, so 10% could become more affordable. That's how I'm solving the affordability problem. I mean, sorry, I'm Lebanese. I don't get that logic, right? So, but you know what? You know what? There are always ways around things. I'm happy we have a housing crisis in a kind of a macabre way. Of course, I don't like having a housing crisis, but I've found that the government doesn't do anything without a crisis. And maybe now, with the added bonus to these houses near stations, to the added ability to add to Sydney, we might have an ability within 3 years. It won't be now. There'll be nothing immediate. Even if I was doing a DA now and you gave me an extra 30%, to change the plans for the extra 30% is another year and a half. And then I need the CC, that's a year. And then I need a year and a half to build the thing. That's if I'm Lebanese and really good, right? Right. By the way, Lebanese is really good, right? So, and that's 5 years, isn't it? Before I can give you a house. 5 years. That's if you give me the benefit now.
What happened to the digitized planning sort of rule where the city of...
It's there, but it's a little bit like changing your windscreen wipers on the Porsche. It doesn't make it go faster. It just makes you see a bit clearer when it's raining. That's all it does.
It was supposed to.
It doesn't do any of that. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Anyway.
I think we've probably got time for 2, maybe 3 more things.
Certainly, you call them out.
Hassan.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Hassan Awad. I actually served on council for quite a few years, and in my last term I was the chairman of the planning committee. So I understand the that very well. What goes on behind the scene when it comes to planning. One of the things that we have in this country, or one of the problems that we actually have in this country that we face that slows the development approval is the public consultation, which is built on entitlement, the self-entitlement that we have in this country. I just came back from Barcelona a few days ago.
You're right.
And I was standing on my balcony looking inside the bedrooms of about probably 30 rooms,
Right.
30 places. Not that we want to have that, but nevertheless, they're there. You can't actually not see people in them. Yes. Yeah.
But you know, Hassan, ما يموت الديب ولا يفنى الغنم. Like, we don't need 400 days of consultation. We don't need 2.
Correct. So, so that in relation to that, we have a problem. We have an inherited or a structural problem with that. My question to you, Dr. Geha, is in relation to the new planning rules to the low to medium housing strategy. Now, the state government did the right thing. They're actually trying to solve this issue by allowing land to be developed and be more denser around public amenities, train stations,
and shopping centres. Yeah.
Now they've done that on a state level, but to be able to actually practically do that on the ground, you need local regulation, the DCP, the ADG to actually reflect that, to allow that. Do you have any information on that? Do you know any behind the scene work?
Yeah, well, this is how it works. The more the minister can put in the SEP, the less discretion the council has. Because for every clause that is contradicted between a SEP and a local policy of any description, the SEP prevails. Now, if you put less in the SEP, you can be more general, but to the extent that, say, setback is not described in the SEP, or height, or something else, usually height and FSR are, right? But to the extent that, say, landscaping percentages are not prescribed, you will go back to the DCP. And if the DCP is problematic, you're stuck exactly where you were before. And you have the same snail's pace processing going on, helping you out. And hopefully it'll come back from Canberra before we get the DA.
guess one of the visions with the building commission was to look at some of the regulations and try to streamline a few processes. Should there be like a counter agency that actually looks at housing reform policy to actually bring all the policies together and actually implement a more logical?
Yeah, probably, George, probably. But you know what? When you think that a quarter of this country is bureaucrats, a quarter of our workforce is bureaucrats, think of what bureaucrats are. They're honest, honourable people supervising the work that we do. I think I'd probably go for a ratio of more workers and less supervisors. And you know what? We've got to entitle people a little bit so they can be honest, honourable and reliable. But you know what? I'm so stunned by every single measure that we do that doesn't work that I'm kind of ready to try new stuff. Like, I was really happy that we're doing the low and medium density rice set. It's something new. We should try it. We don't have obvious new solutions. The 30% increase in density for the tall buildings, we should try it. We don't have other solutions. We don't have obvious other solutions. I mean, if somebody had the guts to throw out 3/4 of the regulations, but no one has the guts. The reason is we're horrified about the unregulated city. We're horrified. By the way, you know, Moses, his surname is Moses. I think it's Robert Moses, who built New York. He basically changed the face of Manhattan as you see it today in the 1920s. And they said to him, all these people are criticising you. They're telling you shouldn't do this. You're pulling that out. You're putting that in. This is no good. This is good. And you know what he said? He said, critics build nothing. We build everything. We should be the critics. That's what he said.
So for a court were to be commissioned to highlight the way of keeping it.
I think if you could have a highly powered commission and get rid of all the other approvals along the way and just give it to those people. And you know what the criticism will be? It'll be like when Part 3A used to go to the minister. It'll be, oh my God, 3 people are deciding the fate of the state. We need to stop this. This is not democratic. This is not... I don't know. And they call all these people stakeholders, George, by the way. So the person who's living 1.4 kilometres from my job, who can't see anything, I can't understand what stake does he have in the project. What does he have? No stake. How come he's called a stakeholder? Anyway, that's a personal view.
Good point on the high rise and low to medium density, but I feel like all we ever get is these shoebox apartments where they're not suitable for families. So we end up having the same problem where you get young couples that go in there, and they can only afford to have 1 kid, and as soon as they have 2 or 3 kids, if they have a 3rd kid, which doesn't help our growth in the country,
Yeah.
they end up moving to these suburbs and it breaks up the family again. So
It's true of all major cities. By the way, nearly 30 years ago, I was sitting with the then housing minister, and he said to me, what do you think about the affordability in Sydney? It was much better then, by the way, 22 years ago. And I said, Minister, Sydney is already like London. In 20 years' time, Sydney will be ahead of London in terms of the unaffordable space. Because it's actually more beautiful, more livable. Everyone that turned up here thought, gosh, why don't I live here? It's an amazing place to live. Now, there is a reason why 70% of Australians live in only 6 places, even though we have 7.7 million square kilometres to share. The reason is because they're beautiful places to live in. So Melbourne's very livable, Sydney's very livable, Adelaide, Brisbane, you name them, they're very livable cities. They're magnificent cities. But here's the problem, is that you actually need to respond to 2 things. The demographic is one issue you need to respond to. So you can build bigger apartments. But you know what all the big companies now do? They build smaller houses, smaller apartments, simply because of price points. Price points. Now, if we could get rid of the charges, I mean, I'll give you an idea. You want an affordable dwelling that we could give to the poor? I'll tell you what we do. The government owns 60% of the land in some capacity or more in Sydney. 60%. be disused Sydney water, it'll be disused railway land, it'll be state government land, it'll be some land, right? 10,000 square metres. You could build on it a few hundred apartments. If you took off all the fees and charges, the GST, the state taxes, the local taxes, the DA fees, the DA consultation fees, if you took all that off and you got a Lebanese builder from this room to build it, he used to be able to build it at 4,000 a metre, now he will build it at 6,500, but still good value. And you know what? Take all the charges off, donate the land for free. Instead of getting a $1.2 million 100 square metre apartment, I could give it to you for 600 grand. That's affordable. But I've been talking to them, the people that matter, and sorry, you all matter more, but they matter because they sort of make decisions. They make decisions. Not good ones most of the time, but they make decisions. I said to them, why don't you do that? We can get the private sector to build it. They'll build it 40% cheaper than government. We can do it faster. We can do it better. We can give you quality. And we can give you 100 units fast. And you don't need an approval because you're the government. You've approved it. You can just stamp it as approved, go build it. And you know what? When most people object to housing, I found, most people, they're just objecting to the design. The design is ugly. And you know why the design a lot of the time is ugly? Because 100 people have played with it. So if you've got a Bengalian tiger, has anyone seen a Bengalian tiger on TV? An amazing animal. I love cats. Anyway, he's the largest cat in the world. He's an incredible piece of work. He's incredible, right? His skin, his stripes, his teeth, right. If you put that with the head of a monkey, the tail of a lizard, the eye of an eagle, what is that? It can't even hunt. It can't do anything. And we often adulterate great designs by the end of a process by a lot of external opinions that are not worthy of being considered. And I promise you, you wouldn't object to the original design if you saw it. That would be my view.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shane. Dr. Shane will be with us for the rest of the night. Sorry, Hanny, you got one. You don't get two. Forgive me. So if you have any more questions, please, he'll be hanging around with us for the rest of the evening. We have a few minutes while dinner is being served. Please network, mingle amongst yourselves. After dinner, I'll be back up here with general business and a few other tidbits. But thank you very much for your attention.